and I am the co-founder and CEO of Almas Risk Consulting, your host and moderator for today's session. Thank you all for joining in. Almas, in association with NSE, has been conducting a webinar series focusing on financial risk management, and that is mainly currency, commodities, and interest rate risk. We have had two such series in the past, very recent past. The first one covered the currency risk management. The second one talked about the economic perspective impacting the financial market. In today's session, we have one of the most important topic and maybe less focused among the corporate treasury, and that's commodity risk management and inventory management. We will attempt answering some of the questions like why, what, and how of commodity risk management. And we have the eminent speakers lined up for the day, for the next 1.5 hours or 1 hour 15 minutes to be precise. Before I invite all the expert panels, let me now invite Dr. Tirthankar Patnaik, who is a doctorate PhD from Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. He has been with NSE. He is a chief economist, NSE, and I invite him to give the opening remarks and set the tone for today's session. Welcome, Dr. Patnaik. Over to you.
Gentlemen, welcome to the webinar. We've seen how the global economy has been hurt by the coronavirus today. And as an economist, one typically looks at how have things panned out in the past. So if I compare the current crisis, that is enjoyed by the pandemic, I could only link it up with the near past with the global financial crisis, and in the late past with the depression of the 1920s and early 30s. Now let me talk about something about how things panned out in the global financial crisis. You had a severe dislocation in the markets, pretty much what we saw what happened in March of 2020. And you also saw global growth coming down to negative figures for the first time since the Second World War in the global financial crisis of 2008. And I say this just to give a perspective of how things have panned out this time. The IMF and various other multilateral agencies have put up global growth to be about -3% for 2020, for the year 2020, and they're not looking for a significant improvement even in 2021. And again, to drive parallels to how things were in 2008, one of the points that central bankers realized in 2008 was a dislocation in the markets led to a sudden lack of liquidity, and that lack of liquidity translated into a lack of solvency for many companies, many banks, many financial intermediaries in general, and which essentially led to them not being able to meet their debt obligations with commensurate, with the commensurate problems. One of the major measures that were taken by central banks all over the world since 2008 was to provide sufficient amounts of liquidity to the global financial system so as to preclude any kind of instances that we would have with market dislocations. So as an example, the US Fed's balance sheet went up from around $800 billion in 2007 to nearly $4 trillion with all the quantitative easing measures that they took up. And the same could be said as that for the Japanese central bank, for the ECB and the BOE and what have you. So we are awash with liquidity. We have been awash with liquidity in the zero interest rate policies that have been followed by central banks globally over the last 10 to 12 years. Now, now in 2020, we find ourselves, in another crisis, the coronavirus crisis. Interest rates globally are still low, and there were only talks about how interest rates should be raised around 2017 or so. But since then, as we've seen, global growth has been coming up, and we've had now the coronavirus crisis. The implications for the topic at hand today are quite significant. So we have commodities, and as Maulik pointed out, commodity risk is what we are discussing today. These are a sort of risk asset, just like another example would be emerging markets that have been awash with liquidity over the last several years. And when you have high liquidity and you have a financial shock, this leads to significant moves in volatility. And we've seen a classic example of volatility in the WTI contract, in the May 2020 WTI contract, when crude prices, one would have never thought that would happen, but crude prices actually went below zero. and a similar kind of volatility is also noticed in base metals, precious metals in general, and commodities as a complex. So the topic today and on how to look at risk management in commodities is an exceedingly important topic. We have a very eminent panel of experts to deliberate on the various aspects of commodity risk management, and I'm sure I look forward to the deliberations. Over to you, Mohan.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doctor. And the key point that you mentioned, financial of commodities are impacting the real business. A very key point, and I'm going to pick that up during our interactions with the expert panel. So let me now welcome all the expert and eminent speakers. We have with us today Mr. Praveen Gupta, a former Managing Director, State Bank of India. Huge experience, very wide experience working in various functions within the premier institution. He is very recently appointed as Senior Advisor to Bank of Baroda. Mr. Surendra Mehta, National Secretary, IBJA, a Chartered Accountant by profession, who is on the steering committee of World Gold Council for setting up Bullion Exchange and Bullion Bank, and is also very instrumental in all the gold-related policy and schemes in the country. Then we have Mr. Vikram Sondhi, a Chartered Accountant who heads the price risk management at Hindalco, one of the largest group, a commodity player. Vikram is responsible for managing commodity, currency, and interest rate risk for the group. And then we have Mr. Nikhil Soni, a Chartered Accountant, a Senior Vice President Finance at Mahindra & Mahindra. Nikhil is responsible for managing liquidity, cash management, in addition to the financial risk management for the group. And Vikram and Nikhil comes from the real business economy, and they are going to share their experience of managing commodity risk. And thank you all the expert panels. Welcome you on board for the today's session. And now let me begin with Mr. Praveen Gupta. Sir, you have been a banker to every Indian and a lender to most of India Inc. You have dealt with various risks, assessed various risks. I'm sure you have seen many global market cycles and the movements. Given the impact this pandemic has on across the asset class, across the industry, from a banker's perspective, what's your view when you look at the borrowers having a significant commodity exposure? So share your perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Malik. See, I'm not really a commodity expert actually, but I can definitely tell you the bank's perspective on the commodity risk. As you know, most of the borrowers of the bank will have some exposure to the commodity. It varies in degree from a borrower to borrower, but most of the borrowers do have some of this risk. So indirectly, that risk does get passed on to the banks actually. So that is the indirect exposure that the banks have. The banks do have, in a way, some direct exposure also when particularly we finance the warehouse financing for the commodities actually, and that particularly happens in the agri segment. First of all, let me talk about the risk actually. If you talk about the commodity risk, actually the way we look at it, first of course is price risk. I think all of you have been talking about that risk. But again, if you look at the price risk, it actually comes from the two factors. One is the price of the commodity itself, and many of the commodities are actually linked to the international benchmarks and are quoted in dollars. So in a way, the FX risk also comes into the commodity risk indirectly. Plus, we have also seen that the risk in the commodity financing for the banks happens on account of deterioration in the quality of the commodity stored also. And this again typically happens in case of the agricultural commodities that the bank finance under the warehouse financing. Plus, I think in the COVID kind of a situation, we are also seeing another kind of a risk arising on account of liquidity. That is, even if you have a commodity and you want to sell, but there are no buyers as of now. So whom do you sell? So even if you find a buyer, in the current situation, you will have a lot of difficulties in being able to move the commodity itself. There is no transportation available. People are not available in a lockdown situation. Moving the commodity also poses another kind of a risk. again, coming from the bank's point of view, I think 2, 3 commodities where the banks actually took a lot of knocks and lost quite a bit of money in the recent past. If I can just mention 2 of them, one was, of course, the gold. I think there are a lot of jewelers who had taken the loans from the banks actually and were directly exposed. And in the last cycle, when the gold prices fell from 1700 to 1200, so we found a lot of them actually going out of business, and the banks actually took a huge amount of losses there. Again, I think Mr. Mehta is here from the Gold Council. He can probably talk a little bit more about those also. Another commodity where the banks took huge losses was the rice exporters actually. So a lot of these rice exporters were exporting to Iran, and suddenly when the imports from Iran stopped actually, so there were a lot of risk that the bank took and the losses that happened actually. Mr. Tirthankar talked about the oil prices going into the negative territory. I think so. Another risk which comes on account of this is about the inventory management and how do you store the commodities also. So that particular risk arose only on account of storage of the commodities. Banks typically don't manage the risk on their own. You are generally dependent upon the borrowers to manage their risk actually. And banks do expect that the borrowers should be able to manage the risk on their own. But yes, there are things which maybe the banks can do to be able to proactively see that the borrowers have managed that risk. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But the direct commodity risk, as I said, that the banks take is when we finance warehouse financing. So there I have a few things to say. There have been a lot of frauds recently on account of warehouse financing, where we find that sometimes in the collaboration of the people who are storing it and the borrowers, and the things get removed actually. There, I think the warehouse receipt, which has been talked about for a long time, it has not really been implemented. I think if that gets implemented, it will actually mitigate the risk for the banks, and the banks should be able to finance. Of late, we have seen there is a bit of reluctance on the part of banks financing even the warehouse receipts also because of the frauds that have taken. Plus, the grounds in India, only about 5% of the grounds are WDRA approved actually. So I think there is a need for more warehousing capacity to be built actually, and more of these grounds to be approved. Plus, of course, the grading of commodities, that is another issue. You, as a bank, we get a receipt which shows that so much commodity has been stored, but the quality is probably not assured actually. So there have been losses on account of that also. But yes, I think the warehouse financing and the other type of financing will continue for the banks. The banks will continue to take the risk, but definitely there is a scope for improvement both on the side of the borrowers as well as on the side of the banks to improve the commodity risk management.
Thank you very much, sir. I think some of the very key points that you have highlighted. One, because of your bank's lending to the corporate, you are directly or indirectly exposed, and you are expecting borrowers to manage the commodity risk. Now, the pandemic lockdown situation like what we have seen, I mean, as a chartered accountant, we all are used to assume that it's a going concern concept. But imagine a 2 month of lockdown and companies are not even able to liquidate their stocks. Now, how do you manage that? So this is a very key point that you have highlighted. We will cover that up in the next round. And one of the industry that you picked up, which is the jewelry industry. We have an expert from the industry, a policymaker, I would say, and would definitely like to hear from him. Mr. Surendra Mehta, in a way, gold has been actually a beneficiary in this round of crisis. We have seen gold prices moving up. And at the same time, there are various risks that one sees when it comes to jewelry companies, the managing of the inventory, even if when you take a hedge, managing the liquidity. So tell us, give us a perspective about, from a jewelry company standpoint, what are the various risks that a company is exposed to and how does one manage it? Mr. Surendra Mehta. Surendra sir?
Am I audible?
Yes, now you are audible. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Good remarks by Gupta ji. And he used one word that commodity is a highly organized market. except gold. It is highly unorganized market, and we all know about it. I was little shattered that I'm one of the panelists amongst all the organized markets, and you are putting me. I myself is at risk. So this is the biggest risk taking today. But anyway, I'm found I'm used to give my candid opinion, and I will do that. One need not worry about this. See, gold has suddenly taken an lot of interest among all the even the equity participants, amongst the commodity participant. I've seen a lot of research analysts taking interest in the gold, and when I hear people like Rakesh Jhunjhunwala and Vallabh Bansali, sir, that Jhunjhunwala and Vallabh Bansali, sir, that please buy gold, and I wish that that his portfolio should have contained the gold. So definitely, it is very interesting to see gold as one of the major commodity, not only in the COVID situation but also in the other situation. One must understand one thing, that gold is not only an investment item, it is also a consumable item. And the people who buy gold, even for the consumption, including marriage, they will check on gold prices daily. That is very important. This does not happen with any other commodity. It is the only commodity where this happens. Now, so when anybody is selling jewelry, or when anybody is manufacturing jewelry, or when the bank is lending money against jewelry, there is a risk, because the consumer is also an investor. Now, this is very typical of this commodity. Gold, if the price goes up, then investor is happy, banks are happy, but jeweler is not happy because there will not be demand. If the prices goes down, the banks are not happy, the investor is not happy, but jeweler is very happy because the demand goes up. Now this is very peculiar of this industry, and the price variates almost every minute. If you go through, look at yesterday, the price went up to 17.49 a dollar, and it came down to almost $17.29 one again. And in the just 3 months back, the price were around $14.53. I think on 16th March it was $14.53. So there was a variation of $330 almost in just 2 months time, 3 months time. So gold is a highly risky commodity, and if one really needs to do a risk management on in the gold, then we should look at the parameters which really affects the gold price. And what are these parameters? I think most of us knows what are these parameters. These parameters includes the inflation, the geopolitical tension. If Mr. Trump says something, then definitely gold prices gets affected. If there is some India-China situation, war-like situation, India-Pakistan war-like situation, or any global situation that will affect the gold price. Gold in India is a multiplication of two factors. It is a multiplication of international gold price and the currency price. So even if there is a variation in one of the either in the gold price or in the currency price, then the Indian gold price are subject to change. So gold affects so many things, gold prices affect so many things. Uh, the problem is how to manage inventory of gold, how to manage risk in the gold, and it is very interesting because I have seen I have been working on the gold for last so many years. If you look at 1925, gold was priced at only 19 rupees for 10 grams. Now it is almost 46,000 or 47,000 rupees per 10 gram. So gold prices keeps rising, but gold have one very bad tendency. Look at 2008, look at 2011. The gold prices went up to $1,900 and it came down to $1,032. So it has a habit of falling by 60% in the international market. But in Indian market, it doesn't fall to that extent. In the Indian market, because of our currency keeps depreciating, the rupee keep depreciating, the prices fall not beyond 20 or 25% at the most. This we have seen in 2011, between 2011 and 2016. We have seen this in 1980s also, when the gold prices went down from $850 to almost $300. So we have seen this, and I think currency is saving Indian dwellers from the global perspective. There are many risk issues as far as gold is concerned, and I think we can come to that on a later stage once you start asking me questions.
I think one key point that you asked and which you highlighted was very relevant. Though there is an international price movement which can be very volatile, but in a way, currency acts as some bit of a cushion against the local jewelry price. You talked about international price dropping in by almost 50-60%, but when it comes to rupee price, because of the rupee depreciation, there has been some bit of an offset. But we will want to cover more about how do you still then manage those risks. We will come to you that, sir, and thank you for highlighting that point. Let me now move on to one of the key commodity players. Vikram, you have been managing the price risk for the group, and both our speakers talked about there is always a close linkage between an international price and the local price. So there is also an element of managing an FX. Now, when you're managing the exposure for a group as big as Hindalco, and which is in the entire chain of the commodity cycle, what are the key things that you look at it? How do you really approach managing the risk of the price of the inventory? Tell us your approach about and the policy that the group follows. Over to you, Vikram.
Maulik, first, thanks for having me on your platform. So we have two businesses. One of our business is a conversion business, which is copper. So we buy copper in the form of an ore and we convert it in the form of finished product. And like any conversion business, the risk management approach there is to eliminate the timing mismatch. It's the timing mismatch which kind of exposes the business to the volatility of prices. Very similar to what Mehtaji mentioned about. So the idea in any conversion business, and copper for us, for example, is to eliminate the timing mismatch. So the idea is to maintain an offset as well. So that's what we do for a conversion business. We have another integrated business, aluminum, wherein we have one side commodity risk.
Yeah.
And we principally have four pillars to managing our commodity price risk. The first pillar is assessing the risk appetite. And I think we invest a lot of time doing this assessment. Normally, this assessment happens at the beginning of the year when we get into a planning exercise for the year and the rolling year ahead. We engage with the CEO and his ExCom members, trying to understand, how they see the appetite for the business. And the idea is very simple. The idea is, as a risk manager, we need to know what's our posture going to be towards managing risk. Is it going to be greed, or is it going to be fear? Which is, are you going to fear a $100 lower price, and therefore we are comfortable letting go a $100 higher price? Or we are very comfortable in the position we are, and therefore we don't mind a $100 price going down, but we want to target a $100 price moving higher. So I think in many ways that posture towards managing this becomes very important. A well-done risk assessment exercise, if you ask me, is half the job done in terms of decision making when it comes to hedging. Come to think of it, any organization, when it runs through its phases, will have different risk appetites. So, when you are in expansion mode, when your balance sheet is stretched, your risk appetite is limited. And hence, you fear more than you greed. Conversely, when you're done away with your risk, with your expansion, and you're in terms of, working in full capacity, your balance sheet is tight and doing well, then, it's less of greed, more of fear. No two companies in the same industry with the same scale of business will ever have the same approach to managing commodity or currency risk, primarily because they might not have the same risk appetite. Imagine company A in an industry with a stressed balance sheet, with capital expenditure lined up, vis-a-vis a company wherein the capital expenditure spend is behind it, and the balance sheet is very robust. The risk appetites are extremely different, and hence the approach to managing risk is going to be very different. So I think the first pillar is defining the posture. Are we Is it greed or fear? The second peg to our approach is that we are long-term hedgers. So when we are looking to managing risk, we are looking to manage risk for the next 3 to 5 years. So anywhere between 1 to 60 months. And the idea is very simple. Either we manage risk, else we'll be forced to manage prices. Imagine a scenario wherein a company hedges only for, let's say, the next 12 months, and that's when you come into a COVID kind of a crisis, which has a longevity of impacting industry and business for 2 to 3 years. I mean, if we are not hedged for longer tenors, then it's a bit of a problem, because when the markets react, they don't give you an opportunity. So the idea is always to try and hedge for longer tenors. And what we do in that is we kind of draw up a cash flow scenario for the next 5 years, and we stress that cash flow scenario. And the idea behind stressing out that cash flow scenario is to find out these pain points, identify the pain points, and then it kind of loops into the risk assessment exercise to say, okay, how do we see ourselves play out in various scenarios that might. So it's extremely important for us that we do long tenor hedges and not restrict ourselves to the next quarter or the next year. I think the next peg to the approach is the framework that we follow. So we have a combination of a price view-led hedging approach and a price agnostic-led hedging approach. So the very first layer of hedges that we do, and we call them core hedges, these are our insurance hedges. We love to enter into any fiscal year with at least 20 to 30% of our insurance hedges in place. And normally, these core hedges are what we do for longer tenures. Now, when we're looking to hedge for longer tenors, it's extremely difficult in a commodity market space to have any amount of certainty on how the markets will play out 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. And hence, we bring in this element of price agnostic hedges. So when you're doing a price view hedge, the price view in itself is the anchor to take the hedge decision. But when you're doing a price agnostic hedge, you need to find an anchor. And that anchor for us is the internal benchmarks that we choose. Those benchmarks could be, let's say, the EBITDA margin that one's targeting, return on capital employed, the cash flow scenario that one is looking at. In the last 10 years of our journey, and we've had, being part of the commodity sector, we had ups and downs in cycles. Our benchmarks have also varied. So, in the phase wherein we had committed billions of dollars for our expansion, there was a lot of ask from existing operations to contribute to those spendings as well. So cash flow became an important benchmark for us. Then, there was a situation wherein when commodity prices tanked and our balance sheet was still over leveraged, debt EBITDA became an important benchmark for us. And now that we're much behind that, our balance sheet is extremely strong and all. So the benchmarks evolve. But the idea is to identify a benchmark which then serves as an anchor for us to take a core hedge, because it's for longer tenors. Once we are done with our initial layer of 20 to 30% for core hedges, then the price view starts to exert that much more influence, because then the second and the third layer, which is more of tactical and opportunistic hedges, are more for shorter tenors. So they are anywhere between 1 to 12 months, wherein you seem to have more certainty on how prices might react. But interestingly, the idea is once you're done with the core hedge, what that does is it actually increases your risk appetite, because what you've done by implementing core hedges, you've actually insulated your performance from the volatility in commodity price. So the idea is as you start slicing in more hedges, your risk appetite goes higher. And as your risk appetite goes higher, you start to have larger influence of price view on what your hedging decisions could be like. The fourth and the last peg of our approach is there has to be an appropriate balance between hedged and open exposure. The idea is not to eliminate risk. The idea is to manage risk. So we would never go ahead and hedge 100% of our exposure. The idea is what is that sweet space that you would like to hedge and keep the balance open. And to a large extent, as I go back to my first and the second peg, it depends upon what the risk appetite is. If it's more of greed, you like to keep slightly higher hedge ratios. If it's less of greed, then you like to keep certain higher open exposures for yourself. So it's that balance that one wants to do.
So I think Vikram very well explained the entire process. Couple of questions just to understand further. When you talked about the core hedges, what is like the approach? When you take a hedges, is it a permanent hedges? Are you like married to the positions, or you allow a flexibility looking at the market conditions?
Oh, we are completely married to our hedges. So there are two hats that all of us wear at different points of time. One is a hat of a risk manager, the other is a hat of a speculator. But we are very clear, we are here to manage risk. We are not here to when prices go down, unwind our position, and then hope for prices going higher, institute them. That's not the intent we have. So we are extremely married to our positions.
And in the current pandemic situation, any different approach, given that, this is probably one of the unprecedented experience for most of us? Any revisit to the approach, or that continues even now?
It's interesting you asked me that. So commodity markets are market disruptive events are no new things for commodity markets, right? If you look at the last 11 years, in the last 11 years, we've had 5 large market disruptive events. If you start with 2009, the GFC, the 2012 European PIGS crisis, the 2015-16, wherein all of a sudden Chinese consumption, economic growth halved in 2 years. Then 2018-19, you had the tariff issues and they're not ready. So, whichever way you look at it, good or bad, but commodity markets and prices go together in many ways. And our approach, the wisdom that we've gathered is through the journey that we've lived over these 10, 11 years. We've learned through each crisis. And this crisis is not different. This crisis just tells us that, gone are the days when commodity cycles would last 5 to 6 to 7 years. Those days are much behind us. Now we're looking at 2 years, 3 years max.
Great, good. So the risk management principle remains, and probably that is one way, as you rightly said, if you don't manage the risk, you end up managing the crisis. And I think that's very well explained. Thank you so much, Vikram. Let me now move on to Nikhil. Nikhil, you have been an end user of the commodities, and auto sector itself has gone through one of the challenging time through the last 1 year, even pre-pandemic. And here is volatility on the commodity space. How do you, as a commodity consumer, manage the risk? Because end of it is a pass-by risk. You consume and you build it into a product. Have you been able to do that? Number one. And if not, what has been really your approach to managing the risk? Over to you, Nikhil.
So thank you, Maulik. If you have to explain the risk management for the business like automotive, tractors, see, first of all, we have a natural edge. So I will say that, while Mahindra is always known as an automotive company, we also have a equally big and probably the major business, which is a tractor business. So we have a natural edge as far as the two businesses goes to a large extent. Having said that, when it comes to commodity, it will be surprising, but almost major part of the commodity that goes is steel, where there is nothing like hedging for us. So we are exposed to the risk over there. So we are very kind of tuned to managing a risk where you can't hedge a commodity. But having said that, we do dabble in the market for hedging some part of the copper, lead, aluminium, where we have some exposures. And that's the extent to which we are doing it. We have been very recent players in this industry, not that we have been hedging it over for a long period of time. What we have been doing is maybe for last 5 years. And over that period, we have been evolving as we see how the practices come about. Having said that, as you said, how do you manage it? Do you pass on the price increase because the commodity price has increased, or do you reduce the rates because the commodity has come down? I don't think business works that way. Simply because the price is determined by the market forces. For us, if there is demand for your product, you have the flexibility to price the product. If there is not much demand, you don't have that much flexibility. You have competition which you have to keep in mind. So there are different factors which you have to look at before deciding on the pricing. So how do we look at hedging, and what do we look at when we do risk management? Slightly different approach from what Vikram said, because as you said, we are the end users. So we don't look at it extremely long term. We have to look at it over a short period of time. So we take every, say, a year at a time, not beyond that, because we don't know what the demand will be 1 year from now, after 1 year. So, or we don't know whether the product that we are there, how it is going to be phased out. So the number of factors that we have to keep in mind. So keeping that in mind, we say that, okay, let's look at only a 1 year hedge at the max, not beyond that. Within that, we again have compartments. There will be a position on which we will be taking, which we are married to also, and which we call it something like a compulsory hedge, because we know that we are targeting a particular level of budget. So we know what the budgeted rate is, and we have to protect that rate at least for some part of the business. We will have some compartment which we will call a view-based hedge, where we have to see how dynamically you can keep on moving with the market. And then we will have an open exposure. For open exposure is exactly to again participate with the market movement the way it is. And why is there an open exposure that is there? The main reason why we have an open exposure is also because if you look at what is hedging, hedging as we look at it is to give time to the management to correct the market requirements. So if the commodity price tomorrow has kind of gone up, it's not so easy as to say that you go and take a price increase. By having hedged, what I have done is I have given management time for 5 to 6 months to say that you can do your cost re-engineering. Try to see how best you can manage your price risk, bring the price down so that in spite of the commodity prices having gone up, you can maintain the price for the customer. So that's the way we look at hedge. So hedge is in a way a thing to manage, to give time to the management to correct the prices, to correct the forces so that they can then accordingly price the product. That's a different way of looking at it, but that's, I think, an important way when you are having at an end use, when you are going to deal with the customers. So that's one aspect of the commodity price. And of course, as you say, when we are looking at commodity, we are also exposed to FX because it's linked. So we have to manage commodity as well as FX risk, because it's an indirect pass through for us. Again, we don't buy commodity directly. The commodity is bought by our vendors who supply products to us. So we have to see how the pass through is there from that pricing, and then infer the impact that will be there on our business and take that into account when we do the hedges. So it is slightly different from a pure commodity business, but these are the various aspects that we keep on looking at. So two basic principles that we follow: don't put all your eggs in one basket, don't take aggressive calls. That's what we have learned over the period, whether doing FX hedging, whether doing commodity hedging, everything, and looking at how the market has operated. So be kind of agile to see how you have to move around, and that's why it helps to take a step back whenever there are situations like this, and don't take any panic calls, but try to see how you can take calls which are sustainable over a longer period of time and which will help business, which will enable business to take right calls going forward.
Very, Nikhil. And one very interesting perspective I'm just picking up from your sharing is the way to look at the risk is you are giving time to your operations, redefining the cost engineering, and that is the essence of any risk management operations. And that's a very unique perspective, and I must compliment you for putting across that on this platform. I have a question for you. When you say that you take up on hedges, and since you are in a dynamic situation and managing a very short-term hedges, here is we have seen, after taking hedges, even that hedges has become a risk. Like we have one of the question popping up on the Q&A from the participants. We have seen oil price settle at negative. So that's like if someone has really taken a hedge on the exchange and you end up settling at a negative price. Though it happened in oil, but in general, how do you then manage even those hedges? Because hedges itself becomes then a risk of the settlement. So how do you take care of that piece?
Yeah, so Maulik, as I explained, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that's what a kind of an answer to your thing. Like if I would have taken an aggressive position of hedging 80% of my exposures, 90% of my exposures, then what you are saying is right. But if I have done a kind of hedging which is compartmentalized to say that I have compulsory hedge of say 20 to 30%, whatever that number may be. I have a view-based hedges which kind of is dynamic to tune to the market, and I have an open position which I know that I'm going to keep open to exactly take care of such events. I think the idea is don't try and maximize profit. Okay, there is a lot of uncertainty around. So try to optimize things. And when you have to optimize, you will have to compromise a little. So you may always not be at the best of the positions, but then you know you will not be caught at the wrong end also. So you have to balance out both, and that's very important when you take such calls. See, the other important aspect that we have to look at is it's not just the price risk that we are sitting, it's the volume risk. It's a volume risk because just take a situation like current year. Okay, if I would have managed initially, I was going to purchase 5 lakh ton. Tomorrow it may just be 3 lakh ton. And if I would have even taken a hedge positions for 4 lakh, I'm going to sit on excess positions. So you have to keep in mind that it's not just price risk, it's a volume risk, it's everything that you have to manage. And keeping that in mind, I think the best thing is never try to maximize, try to optimize whatever it is. Don't worry about not being the best in the thing. You will end up being a second run player maybe. You may not making the highest profit, but you will never take your business to a level where you will be at a risk to say that you don't know how to manage it.
Got it. Thank you so much, Nikhil. Let me now move on to Mr. Praveen Gupta. And as I'm talking to the expert panel, here is a request to all the participants. Any questions at any point in time you have, please keep putting it across. I have an access. I'll pick up those questions and also combine it with my questions and put it up to the speakers. So, Mr. Praveen Gupta, in our experience, especially in the Indian context, all that we have seen, talking to a number of corporates, and whomsoever that we speak to, that somewhere currency versus commodity, there is too much focus on managing, or rather much desired and required focus on currency, but when it comes to commodity, it is kind of a stepmotherly treatment. Maybe that is the way Indian businesses are structured, where the promoter really takes a call on the commodity business. But as a banker, when you look at this scenario where the awareness, the understanding, and even maybe the understanding of various instruments available is relatively low, or even if it is there are not many risk management when it comes to commodity. How do you deal with that, sir?
As I said, the banks directly don't really manage the commodity risk. You leave it to the corporates to manage the risk. I think as two of the corporates were there on the panel, they explained very well about how they manage the risk. And our view is that most of the large corporates have full awareness of the risk they carry and they manage it well, actually. From the bank's point of view, I think where the risk comes are mainly from the mid-corporate and from the larger MSMEs. The risk again comes from two factors. One is there are people who are not aware of the risk and they don't take any hedges, they don't do anything, and they left themselves fully exposed to those risks. And when the prices move in one particular direction, and then they end up taking losses on that. And the second set of customers are who are aware of the risk and are probably too active in managing the prices, actually. And I think the Nikhil said a beautiful line. He said, don't try to maximize the profits. So these are the guys who try to maximize profits by playing on the commodity. Actually, our advice to the customers is that running the business is your core competency. Taking risk on the prices of the commodities in which you deal is not your core competency. You should not be taking additional risk on account of that. But unfortunately, because there are various tools that are available, people use options, people use futures, they end up increasing a lot of leverage and they end up taking risk, which ultimately they are not able to manage. So I think we need to build awareness on both sides. The people who have the risk and are not aware of it and are not hedging it, how they can manage that risk. And more importantly, I think the people who play on the prices actually and try to maximize profits from the commodity price movements, I think they are the ones who actually cause bigger, stress to the banks. As you know, that the RBI has prescribed that for the forex unhedged exposures, that the banks should take declarations from all the customers, and the people who have not hedged their forex exposures well, the banks are actually penalized in terms of having to maintain higher capital, and also, the additional risk weights are there actually. So the banks generally tend to pass on that to the customers. I think similarly, maybe something like that on account of commodities also should be there. So maybe all the banks should ask all their customers in terms of what kind of commodity risk they are taken, how much of hedging they have done, and how much of unhedged exposures on account of commodities they have actually. And this should ultimately go into the risk-based pricing when they do it for their customers. Maybe a bit of a charge for the customers who don't hedge their commodity risk well. I'm sure that customers will not be very happy with that, but I think the banks and the customers need to, work together and bring about more awareness so that at least people are aware of the risks that are being taken and how those risks are appropriately priced into whatever ultimate pricing is actually. But I think just when you start looking at the risk, I am sure that the awareness will increase and the banks don't really have to go to the extent of actually additionally pricing it. But I think if some kind of risk assessment on account of commodities also is done when the banks do the otherwise assessment of the credit facilities, I think this will go a long way in managing this commodity risk also.
Yeah, I think a very important suggestion you gave, sir. The unhedged foreign currency exposure, which RBI announced, I think had an impact on creating an awareness about managing the currency risk. And I think the premise on which this was also announced, we had huge unhedged ECB, external commercial borrowing, and that corporate had taken, and suddenly that really changed the entire space and created an awareness about managing that risk. And a similar line, coming up with regulations or a guideline to manage the commodity risk, for sure it will have an impact, and that's very well pointed out by you, sir, and thank you so much for that. Let me now move on back to the precious metal. Mr. Surendra Mehta, you talked about various risks. Tell us, what are the instruments which are available for a company which is exposed to the precious metal? What are the instruments available and how efficiently that can be really applied by the companies?
Maulik, before I move on to that, let us first understand that how gold market functions. In fact, in the gold market, there are 3-4 prices. The spot prices will be different. Future prices, of course, is always different. And there is another price which is called the bank costing. So in a way, there are 3 prices. So if a jeweler is taking gold from the bank, he is probably paying the higher prices. And if he is buying gold from the market, he would be paying the lower prices. This is a general trend. There could be a price variation of about ₹1,00,000 in purchase of a 1 kilo bar if the goods are purchased from local market or when the goods are purchased from the bank. Now here, why the gold is purchased from the bank? Most of the jewelers in our country have gold metal loan limit exposure with the bank. Now, what is gold metal loan? Under the gold metal loan, what happens is that this loan is available at 4% interest, 3.5 to 4.5% interest, wherein it needs to be settled at 188 days within 6 month time. Now, after 6 month time, you have to again go to the bank, pay the entire money, and then borrow gold once again. And the repayment is at mark to market price. So it's a natural hedge in a way. But what happens that when a jeweler is exposed to the bank limit, he is paying the higher prices because he is forced to buy this gold from the bank. Now that is a big risk he is taking because the gold in the local market or the spot market is available at a lower price. Now why it is available at lower price? It is available at lower price because of so many factors, because of scrap gold coming in the market, while the banks are only doing business with LBMA gold. They are not supposed to do business with non-LBMA gold bars. So the issue is even the banks that way is taking a risk. On what basis the valuations have been done in your balance sheet, whether it is valued at the bank's costing, whether it is valued at spot price, or how the valuation has been done. There is another concept. There is another concept, and that is gold is refined in India. When the gold is refined in India, the dores are imported and it gets converted into gold. There, the government gives the duty benefit of 0.65%. In normal case, the duty on gold is 12.5%, GST on gold is 3%. But if you import dore and refine gold in India, you have to pay duty of only 11.85%. So there is another method by which the gold prices can be cheaper. So these are various methods. So the jeweler has to actually look out for what gold he's buying, how he's valuing his balance sheet, what are his accounts team or the finance team doing while in case of valuation. Whether if they are valuing it at cost, then I'm sorry, it is an absolutely wrong method to value gold at cost price. There is another problem is that the duty structure. Now this is a very big risk. The duty was earlier about 10 years back, it was 1%. Now it is 12.5%. Now my biggest worry about duty, let me tell you, the sovereign gold bond which is issued by the government contains 12.5% duty. But whether on redemption this will include 12.5% duty or not, I myself have a doubt. Because people have already gained almost 70-80% money in the sovereign gold bond right from the first issue. So it is possible that government start reducing the duty and maybe for the revenue purpose they start increasing the GST. Now what happens? So you have an inventory in your with you, which is on which you have paid maybe 10% duty or 12.5% duty. What happens to that? There is another risk which every jeweler takes is that whether his designs will actually work or not. See, if we are talking about bullion, it's a different thing because there is no design in bullion. You go to China and all, there are designs in bullion. They make bullion with dragon photograph and all this, but it does not happen in India. We make only small gold coins with Lakshmi photograph or Ganpati Ji's photograph. But in India, it does not happen. Now whether those designs will work or not. So whether he has to melt those inventories or not. So what he will do, how he is going to manage this inventory. It is not only managing the price risk. You have to manage duty risk. You have to manage your method of buying gold. You have to manage your designs. So there are n number of factors. So one cannot say it's not easy. Like Mr. Nikhil was saying that they get 5 days time or 6 days time. But a jeweler or a gold dealer, he does not get even a 10-minute time because the moment the price changes, it gets reflected on various digital media, including it runs 24 hours on the television. So a customer immediately comes and says, "Sir, gold price has gone down, 100 rupiah kam ho gaya, 200 rupiah kam ho gaya." See, so these are very big risks which a jeweler is taking. The issue here is, and apart from this, there is a purity risk. Now, when he manages inventory, how does he ensure that the gold which are purchased are as pure or which are manufactured are as pure as they are being billed to him? It is very, very important. Even a variation of even a 0.1 gram can be a killing factor in case of this industry. So one needs to understand, so it is not only a price risk, it's a design risk, it's a purity risk, what kind of tolerance he has to take into account while doing all this risk. Then there is a risk of security risk, safety risk. So many risks are involved, right from manufacturing to the marketing. So gold is a commodity where there is a yeah, Maulik, go ahead.
Yeah, so from all the points that you're mentioning, one thing which I'm really taking up is that even though we may adopt various strategies for hedging, no one hedging strategy is a perfect hedge. And because there are so, like you mentioned about spot price, future price, and even the price at which the bank will cut the gold. Given that all the dynamics are there, at any point in time for any corporate or any jewelry company to really manage, they need to be aware about the real differences between all of them, and at the same time adapt to the changing requirement, because this is a case where even the hedges are not perfect. You may think it is a hedge, you may think gold metal loan is a hedge, but you may end up creating an inefficient hedge. And that's a dynamic within which you'll have to really operate. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. Maulik, let me tell you one more risk which nobody even thought of today. The risk of hallmarking. Now, government has come out with mandatory hallmarking from 15 January 2021. Now, suppose you are left with an inventory which does not match with your hallmarking requirements. What do you do with those inventory?
yeah,
You have no choice except to melt those inventories or to sell those inventory at a lower price. And there is another risk to a big companies, to a big corporates. When the hallmarking comes, when the mandatory hallmarking comes, what is the difference between a big branded jeweler and a small gully corner jeweler? There is no difference because gold is a gold. So
Very true.
it's a risk which a big jeweler is taking, and it's a risk which a small and it is beneficial to the small jeweler. So these are risks for which I don't think any hedging strategy can ever be made or will be made. I don't know. I'm working with NSE on making various trading strategy. I think in the last NSC session, we have requested that we need to come out with a booklet where these things can be incorporated. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you so much, sir. And I think the last piece that you talked about, the premium that is attached to the brand may suddenly disappear because of the changed dynamics. And thank you so much, sir, for pointing that out. I'm picking up a question from the participants, and this is for Vikram. I'm not sure whether you want to address that. It's on the market view. What's the view? This is from Hardik Brahmbhatt. What's the view in base metal, especially copper and aluminum, till December 2020? We have seen a good recovery rally in copper and aluminum in recent past, and somewhere linking that up with the economy. And with that, I am adding one more question related to the hedging that you talked about, because when you pick up your hedging strategy, there are market dynamics. Like we have seen, especially in case of aluminum, as we were studying of late, there are times when it is in a contango to the extent of even 7 to 10%. And there are backwardations which can go to -2, -3 as well. So how, and given that you also mentioned that you are married to a positions, so how do you really take care of that and that market dynamics and a market view? Over to you, Vikram.
So, Maulik, on the first question on the market view, I think the lowest for the year is now behind us. If you were to ask me, so we are in uncharted territory. The only benchmark that any one of us has on how a post-COVID industrial metal market will look like is to see eastwards and see what has happened in China in the last 3 years, and the recovery in China, both in economic activity as well as industrial metal prices, has been very impressive. From the lows of March, and I think that's when they kind of opened up the country post-COVID. In the last 8 to 10 weeks, industrial metal prices have gone up anywhere in the range of 15 to 20%. I'm talking about major industrial metals. The revival of the economic activity has been pretty strong. The inventory built up is now half. So in the last 10 weeks, they have halved their inventory that they had piled up in the ecosystem. My sense is in the ex-China world, as we try and come out of the lockdown, and we've started doing that globally in the last 2 weeks, no wonder metal prices on the London Metal Exchange have started demonstrating the same trajectory as we saw on the SHFE in China. So you would see that in the last couple of weeks, industrial metal prices are higher anywhere between 8 to 10 to 15%. Copper has done the best of the lot, and which is not surprising because copper mirrors economic sentiment, market sentiment the most. My sense is currently the market perception is bearish in terms of how consumption growth will look like. If China as a benchmark is anything to demonstrate, we might not actually do as well as China because they're very different economies. And when I say we, I mean the ex-China world. But the path ahead is extremely clear. And I've been going through and speaking to a few global research analysts, and the last 2 weeks have made all of them, or majority of them, upgrade their consumption growth forecast. I'll be least surprised as we get deeper into this revival scenario. We'll see the pessimism that was there in the last couple of months on, as if, consumption growth be a grave for itself. I think we'll come a long way from there. So I think we are currently pricing in the most pessimistic scenario for base metals. The last 2 weeks has shown us, what could be a realistic scheme of things. One of the other questions was on contango, and the interesting thing is that for aluminum, let's say for example, you see that there'll be excessive surplus this year, but the contango is so remunerative that a lot of the global traders are just buying metal and putting it to their warehousing. So they're doing a very remunerative cash and carry trade. So on paper, you will see a surplus, but that surplus is just bought and stacked up into a warehouse. And that surplus never, influences the physical market, or at least that surplus will not influence the market this year, because these are normally 12-month tenor cash and carry trades. So that's a huge positive for aluminum as well, because, on paper, you might see a surplus, but that surplus is never going to interfere with the physical market. Having said that, I will also admit that there are enough and more risks on the table. The second wave of COVID, the second round of a US-China tariff war. Who knows what happens there? The pace and the path of economic recovery. We are all in the realm of different scenarios that might play out. We'll have to see post-COVID how economic recovery plays out in the ex-China world. Not to mention the US elections that will happen in 11th. I think our table is full when it comes to this as well. And hence, I'm pretty much convinced that this is going to be an extremely volatile market for industrial metals. And the volatility, if the last 2 weeks is anything to go by, the volatility will be extremely sharp and painful. You will see in 5-6 working days, prices go high 10%, and then a bad news come in, prices go down again. So no better time than this for all of us to strengthen our risk management processes when it comes to commodity. But I think one thing, I'm pretty much convinced in my mind that we're going to end this year with prices higher than what they are now for majority of industrial metals.
Do you see the ample liquidity flush around by the bankers? All central banks all around the world will have a further impetus to the outlook that you talked about. Too much liquidity will eventually lead to commodity price inflation. You said this.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And a large part of what we've seen in the last 2 weeks to 4 weeks is influenced by all that liquidity, and this liquidity is here to stay. So there are a lot of positives for commodity markets. And again, the benchmark for what liquidity can do is the last decade. We saw what happened from 2010 to 2013, 14. So there are enough and more benchmarks on the table on what liquidity can do, what China can do post-COVID. So I think there's enough and more on the table to suggest that we're being extremely pessimist on industrial metals, and prices should be higher.
So there is clearly a case for a long exposure to really watch out and be well guarded.
I would say so.
And thank you so much, Vikram. Nikhil, I want to talk to you about the ecosystem. The automobile is always you carry many vendors, and the link is as strong as the weakest link in the pipeline. So you talked about the risk management as far as Mahindra and Mahindra is concerned. You deal with a lot of vendors, and I'm sure some vendors would have faced a situation where they would have built up the inventory, and here is a sudden commodity price fluctuations, and they don't know what to do, because I'm not sure whether they are really equipped to manage this kind of risk. How do you really strengthen and empower the entire ecosystem? What measures are you taking? First, are you seeing that as a risk? Your views on that. Nikhil, over to you.
Yeah, Maulik. So I think it's a very relevant question. And as was said earlier, while big corporates or big OEMs are kind of prepared to for such situations, or rather are at least better placed to kind of manage the situations. When you look to probably a slightly medium level industry or a small scale industry from where the vendors particularly come, then they are not as well equipped to handle the situations in a normal course. And again, here it is something which is a situation which is completely unprecedented. And when I say unprecedented, it means this word is really taking meaning now. While this word was used not many times in the past also, I think what situation we are going through is something which has never been experienced by anyone. So how do you handle such a situation? Let me just give you an example as to how uncertain things are. As you said, that there is a situation where there is no demand. Yes, I don't know when in the past did auto companies reported zero sales in any month. We saw it in April. Okay. At the same time, in the month of May, at least our tractor sales were higher than last May, May 19, and that's in just both are in the month of lockdown. So how do you plan for such scenarios even for the vendor? So at one case, if you look at the tractor sales, what we are hearing that if there is a supply, there is demand. So there was enough demand. So the vendor has to plan for supplies. If it doesn't plan for supplies, you are going to lose out on the demand. At the same time, you don't know how it's going to pan out for the auto industry, where the demand may be slow over a period of time. So you have to prepare for the best. You have to prepare for what's going to happen. So like, Mr. Doshi, so our ex-director in Mahindra, he used to say one line, which I still remember. Sometimes, I can't explain, I will complain. So that's what we are doing in the tractor industry today. I can't explain where the demand is that it actually overtakes last year's demand. But then that's something which you don't want to kind of say to go too much into. We are accepting it. So we also have to kind of manage our vendor chain in that light. We cannot be too pessimistic about it. At the same time, we cannot say that you manage on your own. So I think there's some amount of handholding that has to go, and which always happens. So there is a very strong network which manages the vendor side, in the sense that they also handhold them through these processes, through such times, so that they know how to manage the risk that they are setting on. Okay, now there will be some vendors where the policies may not be existing. Probably this is the time when you can see that those vendors instill those practices. Okay, like they say, don't waste a crisis. I think this is what the vendor should look at. There are times when you may look at it as an investment, but that investment is to help you through such times. Because there is nothing like a better risk management practice. If your vendor is not strong on risk management practice, is today exposed to a risk which has been created, I think you are just going to help him survive for next 2 months or 3 months. You cannot help him survive longer. They have to ensure that they get in right practices. And this is a lesson for vendors, I will say. It may be a hard thing to say, but there is a lesson to learn in this, that without good practices, without good risk management practices, you are going to be at the wrong end of the. Today, you said that banks have pushed in liquidity, central banks have pushed in liquidity. There is abundant liquidity into the system. Is it available for the vendor?
Yeah.
It's not. It's going to only good corporates. And why are banks at fault? I'll say no. Because no one is going to give money to create an NPA. So whole ecosystem has to work together. So probably if I have to just, it may not be a right analogy, but if I have to just look at 20 years back when companies or OEMs invested in ERP packages, there were mainframes which were there, things were running smoothly. But then people invested in ERP, it was a huge investment because they had to come up measure with the times. Probably similarly, uncertainty is part of our life. This is not a demand-led disruption, this is not a supply-led disruption, it is a demand-led disruption. So if tomorrow, if you have a solution, it may just be a V-shaped recovery also. You don't know. Tomorrow you have a solution to this, you have a V-shaped recovery. Tomorrow you don't have a solution, you don't know when the phase 2 is going to start, like Vikram said. So it's just at completely uncertain times. You have to invest in good practices. So probably what the vendor will have to do is to invest in good practices, look at how to leverage professionals, look at how to leverage good people who are available around them, look at how to leverage professionals who are with OEMs who are working with them, and get those practices to help them through these times. There is no magic solution over here. I will have to say, there is nothing like, you will give money and say that, okay, help yourself for this short period of time. But you don't know whether this is going to get over in 3 months. So you have to invest in something which is going to be long term.
Thank you, and very well explained. Let me take your point and go on to Mr. Praveen Gupta. In the interest of time, we have last 5 minutes. First, I want to pick up Mr. Praveen Gupta's thoughts on what Nikhil you mentioned, and then we'll have a quick round of the closing remarks. Mr. Praveen Gupta, he talked about the liquidity available, but not with the corporates. At the same time, risk management practices, governance, that really differentiates A company from B. As a lender, what would comfort you when you look at the company? And secondly, from a risk aversion point of view, when the banks are not lending it to the corporate, would this really having a great practice make a difference? Mr. Praveen Gupta.
I think in a way, when Nikhil answered the question itself, see, there is so much of liquidity. The banks are not happy parking this with RBI because what you get from RBI is even not covers the cost of funds for the banks. Actually, the banks will be very happy to lend. But I think it's a question of whether it is risk awareness or I think there is a more prudent towards the risk by the banks also. I think the talking entire thing is a risk management. I think the banks also need to manage their risk. Now, if the banks have to give more money to the corporates, the question has to be on what basis do you give? What are the kind of projections you have? What assumptions you take? I think the things are so fluid at this point of time. I'm not sure there are many corporates who are able to actually give you a very reasonable projection in terms of what their future sales are going to be. How do you assess the working capital requirements and how are they going to service? Because if you give money which goes only towards meeting the regular expenses that the corporates have, and it doesn't lead to any kind of cash generation, I'm sure that many of the corporates will have a lot of difficulties in repaying the loans also. See, the RBI has done the right thing. They have given some moratorium, they have given restructuring. They haven't actually allowed any restructuring for the larger corporates as of now. I guess at some point of time when the things become a little more clear, more stable, and the banks and the corporates are able to make some reasonable assessments about the future, that is when the banks will probably need to be restructured and more liquidity can be provided. As of now, I don't think that anybody is in a position to assess the credit requirements itself on a reasonable basis and to be able to provide more money there.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. As almost all the speakers talked about, investment into a risk management practice, the governance do differentiate a company, and especially when the bankers are the key stakeholders in the entire business. I think that would really go a long way. This investment will definitely go a long way in terms of the returns for the future and even insulating a lot of businesses from this volatility in the commodity space. I'm going to pick up the few key closing remarks, and let me start with Vikram, and then we'll move on. In the meantime, there are one or two questions which are popping up. Let me see if I can cover that in the next few minutes. Vikram, anything, closing remark, any learning from your experience? Over to you.
So, I'm just 2 points, quick ones. First, for companies, please don't look at risk management as a profit center. The moment we start evaluating risk management in terms of how much money we gain or how much money we lose, I think we lose the purpose, we defeat the purpose. And risk managers per se are very smart people. So, very subtle discussions wherein you bring in the discussion on, are we in the money? Are we out of the money? Are we making money? The risk manager gets the point. We are not here to make money. We are here to manage risk. I think that's a very big difference that we need to appreciate. In our case, if you ask me, we are very happy if we go wrong on our hedges. Because imagine what we are going to earn on our unhedged exposure. We are going to be a much more stronger, happier organization. So, please, this is not a profit center to begin with. And second is for risk managers. We have very different stakeholders. We have, as Praveenji was there, as a bank who needs certainty. We have equity participants who want to participate in cycles. We have management who want to actually meet all of this and even more. So there are conflicting stakeholder requirements. So my only point to them is keep persisting. It's not easy to sell through a potential risk when things are good. To tell somebody that there's a potential risk on the horizon a year or two down the line, and hence we need to manage that risk, is not an easy thing to do. So I think persistence for the risk manager is extremely important. We need to keep knocking in terms of driving this agenda. So these are my 2 big learnings which I wanted to mention here.
Thank you so much, Vikram. Yes, Nikhil. a closing remark. And I want to go to Surendra ji after you because I have a question for you from the
Yeah,
participant.
so I think Vikram has very nicely captured the commodity part of it. Let me just, since you have a lot of people who have come from the middle or the smaller section, so I'll just say that for small scales and for medium scale industries, the other important commodity is cash, and cash is the king. So for the current times, I will just say that ensure that you have sufficient commodity cash with you, and these are the times when you will have to plan for that first. So one has to, and it's a evolving process which I have also learned over a period of time, and which I will still do, and I think it's a very good practice. Look at what is the survival cash for you, maintain that survival cash today for at least next 6 to 7 months, so that it will help you tide over the current situation, and probably then handle the other practices better. Because while you do your risk management, if you are troubled with one of the some of the basic things which are required to carry on in your day-to-day business, you will never be able to take a decision in the right frame of mind. So while you manage all other commodity risks, you manage your most important commodity, that is cash also.
Thank you, Surendra ji, and management. Very well said. Surendra ji, I have a question for you from the participants, and he's Upen Shah, who talks about availability of gold under gold metal loan in India during this pandemic period, say for next 6 months. And related with that, just wanted to add my one bit that we have seen 2.5% as a gold loan interest. I mean, on the gold and interest, there was a gold monetization scheme introduced by government. And today, when I look at State Bank of India savings rate, that's about 2.75. Do you think gold will now gain interest, and the availability of gold, especially for the jewelers, will become much more than what it was earlier, and thereby reducing the import of gold? Connecting that with the question that a participant asked. Surendra ji, your view, please.
First of all, about gold metal loan, I would urge all the jewelers, please do not go for the gold metal loan. Instead, go for cash credit limit, because eventually what kind of interest they are paying, they probably are not calculating that interest, or that there are better opportunities available on the exchanges. Now the NSE has also come out with 100-gram option contract. So if you hedge your risk by taking gold on the through the cash credit facility, probably you will be better off. That is one big learning I want to give to all the jewelers. Secondly, you mentioned about gold monetization scheme. The gold monetization scheme requires that your household golds are melted, and that is kept with the government, and maybe after 7 years or so, you will get those melted piece of gold to you. See, we are a very emotional country, and we have 25,000 tons of gold, and I don't think any lady is going to allow her jewelry to be melted. It is just impossible. And you can the moment, even when they come to sell their jewelry, we have seen tears in their eyes. Jewelry is very emotional commodity. Don't take it as I stated earlier, it's an unorganized market. Why unorganized market? Because it is purchased by 700 tons of gold jewelry in India is purchased by household. So it's a commodity which has a passion. India has a passion for yellow commodity. So gold monetization scheme per se will not be successful. How government can reduce the import of gold? I still do not understand why banks are selling gold after 180 days. Once the gold metal loan is given, why not just roll it over? Why banks want that after on the maturity of 6 months, the jeweler needs to pay, and then bank will again sell? Are they not increasing import of the country? This is a clear case of increasing the import of the country, and the jeweler is paying higher prices when he is purchasing gold from you. So bank is losing money, jeweler is losing money, country is losing money. So I do not know who has framed this product. We fully do not support this product at all. And third most important thing, there are now various jewelry product, various gold products available in the market. There is a sovereign gold bond. There is a digital gold. There is a ETF. Then gold ETF funds, bullion, then jewelry. So, and then public deposit scheme. So there are various schemes available in the market. So a jeweler, especially a jeweler who only sells jewelry, he must come out clean. He must be transparent while selling the jewelry. So he can be only be transparent with fair pricing, fair return policy, fair exchange policy, give only sale only hallmark goods. Otherwise, this business will be taken over by other products which are much attractive. Though the market for sovereign gold bond is just 10 tons a year, but suddenly we have found in last 2 months, even during lockdown situation, the government sold almost 4 tons of gold through the sovereign gold bond. So in a way, these digital products, these paper gold products are peeping into the jewelry market, and for this, jewelers needs to be very, very careful. And in fact, they should start selling this product. If they start selling this product, probably they will make more money because you cannot stop market to expand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And now I want to go to Mr. Praveen Gupta as the closing remarks. Sir, I have a pointer for you. And this is from one of the participants, Mr. Ram Narayan. Is it a good time to build up a robust commodity exchange market in India? And one more pointer, we talked about just about 6 months back, we had the annual conference where we spoke about moving the currency market, the NDF market from London to Mumbai, making the local financial market strong enough and vibrant enough. Is this the movement for the commodity exchange market as well in India? So your closing remarks on this.
I personally think, as of now, for the corporates who want to hedge, there are commodity markets that are available. I think the commodity markets in India have been doing very well. And as per that RBI circular of March 18, there are facilities available for people to go and hedge abroad also. So obviously, since the quantities or the volumes dealt in India will be very small, so whether some of those commodity markets can be replicated in India, I'm not sure. But I think the important thing from a customer's point of view is that he should be able to hedge it. And you talked about the NDF market. So instead of moving into India, now that the banks have moved abroad actually. So the Indian banks branches abroad also are now allowed to participate in the NDF market. I understand that most of the private sector banks have already started, and the public sector banks would also be starting participating in the NDF market very soon, probably in the next few weeks it should happen. So I think the markets are getting integrated. As I said, the basic concern for the people is that whether they are able to hedge the risk they are carrying or not. Actually, I think the markets do allow at this point of time. As I said, the commodity markets have done very well in India, the exchanges that are there in India. So obviously, the scope can expand going forward as and when the demand rises.
Thank you so much. And thank you all the panel speakers. It has been indeed very, very useful, insightful, your views, your perspective over the last 1 hour. Let me quickly sum up some of the key points that has really come out of these deliberations. We talked about investment into the risk management practices, good governance. In fact, that itself can become a base for the lender to really view it from a different lens. We talked about unhedged foreign currency exposure. On the lines of that, can we have something like commodity risk management disclosure by the company? We heard a comment, manage the risk. It's better than managing a crisis. We talked about warehousing financing as one way to manage the risk. And I think the entire ecosystem management, especially on the risk management, is also key. We also heard focus it as a cost center. Don't really get into a profit center approach. With all that, it has been a really wonderful interacting with all of you. Thank you all very much for taking time out and sharing your insights and perspective. Thank you all the participants. I think you have been a great participants looking at the question that we have. We haven't been able to take up all the questions. Thank you very much for really putting those questions across. Thank you NSE and the entire team of NSE. Thank you Almas and all the team members who have really worked on this project. Thank you Shriram. Thank you Vijay for managing the social media. And special thanks to Bijur, who has been always mentoring the entire webinar series that we have launched. And we look forward to come with more and more webinar series in the area of financial risk management. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.